Who killed Sarah? Events began for a young man named John. Rent an apartment on the outskirts of the city in search of tranquility, and also commensurate with his income, since he works in jobs that do not require him to come to the workplace himself. It ends as soon as the project is completed. But the events that were waiting for John in the new apartment. It was far from the calm he was hoping for. It was the house where John rented an apartment. It has 5 floors. The main facade of the building is located on the quiet street. All the balconies had a view of the street. As for the rear side of the building, it overlooked small corridors separating it from neighboring houses. The windows of the kitchens and bathrooms overlooked these corridors. The windows had iron skewers stacked around each window. There was also an emergency iron ladder at the height of the building. John was renting one of the apartments on the 5th and last floor. The entrance to the building and the stairs are of medium quality marble, but it is consistent with the exterior of the building. There was an internal skylight of the building, and all the internal rooms of John's apartment overlooked the windows of the apartment located on the other side of the building. John's first observation was that all the windows of that apartment. It is closed and apparently no one inhabits it. But the first night he found the lights of the apartment all lit up and was able to catch a glimpse of a beautiful girl living in that apartment. But of course he didn't know anything about her. As the days passed, John began to notice that there was something strange in the girl's behavior. She was passing by the windows in front of him, but there was something strange in her movement. She walks in front of him but doesn't seem to move her body. And that the apartment where she lives is closed all day. The door of the apartment where this girl lived was not adjacent to John's apartment. The door of that apartment was located at the end of the corridor that turns right and is blocked by a high wall. Perhaps that was the reason why John did not feel for the girl when she left her apartment or when she returned to her. John was a handsome young man with a strong physique, and the girl liked him. John tried to get closer to that girl, and he caught her attention, and she was looking at him smiling. But she was not responding to him. She was just looking at him without showing any sign or hint that she was ready to enter into any relationship with him. John decided to take a step forward in order to get to know his young neighbor. He updated himself. Maybe the girl works during the day and comes at night after finishing her work, and he decided to wait for Sunday as a weekly day off. And John thought that Sunday would be an occasion to get to know his young neighbor. And on Sunday morning John came out of his apartment at 11 o'clock, heading through the corridor to where the door of his young neighbor's apartment is located. But when he arrived at his neighbor's apartment, an unhappy surprise awaited him, as he discovered that the door to her apartment was locked from the outside with a large and old lock on it. It looks like it hasn't been opened in a while. Surprised by this unexpected surprise, he hurried downstairs until he met the building guard and asked him about it. But the guard's answer came as a shock, as the building guard marveled at the Mexican man. He told him in his broken English that no one was staying in that apartment. He told him in poor English with some mistakes that the girl he was talking about died 10 months ago, murdered in her apartment. No one knows yet who killed this beautiful girl. The guard of the building asked him in a strangled voice filled with fear, "Are you serious, sir, that you saw that girl?" John felt that the whole world was spinning before his eyes. Oh my God, what is this? Did a day come to him in which he lives a terrifying story from the stories he always heard when he was young in order to scare him? Is this real? Or is the estate guard mocking him? Or trying to scare him? But because of his simple language, he cannot tell him the full details. The guard of the building left him rushing into his room waving his hands and asking him to wait for him. And it was only a few seconds, and the guard came back with an old newspaper. He opened one of its pages and said to John, "Look." The photo of his young neighbor was in the corner of the page from the top and written below the photo frame. The police find the body of a girl named Sarah murdered inside her apartment. His breathing and heartbeat began to accelerate and sweat poured from his forehead. Does he now have the ability or the courage to climb into his apartment after all that he has heard? Well, at least the clock is now pointing to 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and the girl only shows up at night, and he needs to pack his things to leave the place. He decided to go up to his apartment. Upon arrival on the 5th floor, he could not restrain his curiosity and went to the other side where the door to the apartment of the girl Sarah is located. He wants to make sure she exists. Is the big lock still on the door? Everything was as he had just left it, with complete calm, as if life had stopped outside the house. No sound of cars driving. And there are no sounds of birds on the trees that fill the neighborhood where he lives. He went rushing to his apartment, opened the door, entered hurriedly and closed the door from the inside with the key, as if preventing someone following him and trying to enter his apartment by force. He sat in his room. He began to sweat and felt that symptoms of fever were beginning to appear on him. And he got so worried that he finally fell asleep. But, suddenly, and after a while he spent her asleep because of his extreme fatigue. Affected by the fever that hit him, he felt the presence of another person in the room. He opened his eyes slowly. The girl was Sarah, who lived in the apartment next door. That murdered girl is nursing him and calming him down. Her calm features and charming smile were. She almost swears to him that she didn't come to him to hurt him with anything. John pulled himself together and began to look at her in fear, wonder and curiosity. His eyes were almost uttering and saying, "Why did you show up to me, and we were not friends before, or we had an ex-acquaintance?" Sarah read these questions on John's face and began to tell her story to him. She was living in this apartment alone after her parents died, and that she was engaged in sewing intermittently. She had no money to start her own business. She was just sewing women's clothes for acquaintances and friends of acquaintances. And she felt that she was coveted by many men or young men. Maybe because of her beauty, maybe because she lives alone. And maybe also because many believe that they can control it, due to its material conditions. She doesn't know who killed her and wants to help him find the killer. Who surprised her when she was standing in front of her apartment door. When she put the key in the door, he hit her with a piece of iron on her head. You couldn't see him. He then took her inside her apartment and raped and then killed her. She also does not know why she appeared to him, because she hasn't left the place since the night she was killed. But no one could see her as well as he could. She believes she has 5 suspects. The fact that someone killed her. The first is the custodian of the property who works in the building where you live, which was prolonging the look at her body when she goes out or comes home. The second, he is a supermarket worker who works in the shop near the building. He is a playboy known for his passion for girls. She often saw him walking at night behind her. The third, he is the building's maintenance officer, who comes once a month to do maintenance work. It was seen permanently without any justification, and he always asked to enter her apartment for maintenance, although there are no complaints on her part. The fourth, he is the installer of satellite dishes and TV channel service responsible for the neighborhood, where she noticed that he was climbing on the roof of the building facing her apartment. He sits in front of her balcony, looks at her and watches her for hours. He is working on repairing the cables of the TV channel networks in the region. The fifth person, he was a rich man in his late 50s. He lives about 5 blocks away in a small quiet villa. He was asking her to come to his house to make some dresses for his wife. But she never met his wife. She was tailoring clothes based on sizes for other clothes of his wife. But she found out by chance. He lives alone after his wife died a while ago. Maybe he was asking her to come on the pretext of falsely tailoring clothes for his wife. He had other intentions. There were conflicting emotions in John's head. Fear that he is now sitting with the ghost of a murdered girl. Grief over the murder of the girl he began to admire. Excitement and curiosity to find out who killed that beautiful girl. All these feelings and thoughts prompted him to stay, in order to try to find out who killed Sarah. Sarah went and left him alone. And inside there are conflicting feelings, mixed with fear, pain, and excitement. He spent the night lying on his bed trying to regain his strength and vigor, in preparation for the journey in search of Sarah's killer. The next morning, John woke up feeling better than the night before. He changed his clothes and rushed out of the apartment. At the entrance to the building, and the grandfather of the keeper of the estate puts a little water on some plants located in front of the entrance to the building. John looked at him closely. The keeper of the building was a 40-something man with a slender body. His profile does not indicate that he has a criminal background, but he lives alone, has no wife and no children. John asked him, "Are you buying items at the supermarket near the building?" The building guard replied to him, "No." He said that everyone calls the supermarket, and he sends them all the requests. Even he personally, if he wants something, he calls the supermarket. In the meantime, a person in his 30s entered the building. Strong-built, dressed in the clothes of maintenance workers. He greeted the guard and went into an adjacent room. The building guard's room is marked "No entry for non-maintenance personnel." The man was wearing the maintenance worker's shoes. It makes a birdsong-like sound on the floor of the building. John waited for the maintenance worker, who came out after only 2 minutes, and asked him if he would like to go up to his apartment to check it and check for himself if there are any maintenance-related issues. The maintenance worker replied that he does not enter the apartments of tenants unless there is any complaint on their part. Is she complaining about something specific? John replied in the negative. And here's the legacy of the outgoing maintenance worker. John made sure that this maintenance worker is a liar, because Sarah told him that on every visit he insisted on her entering her apartment without complaining about her. John asked the building guard, "Do you go up to the apartments located in the building?" The building guard replied to him that he goes up on Sunday morning every week, just to clean the stairs. Then the building guard asked him why all these questions. "Is there something missing from you?" John didn't answer and walked in the direction of the supermarket. In Sharda's mind, he imagines the building guard quickly climbing up behind Sarah with his lightweight body and hitting her on the head. He drags her into the apartment, assaults her, and then kills her. He then started to imagine the maintenance worker too when he saw Sarah climbing the ladder. He came rushing from behind and surprised her with a blow with an iron tool from the equipment or tools that he uses in his work. Suddenly John noticed that in front of the supermarket door. He entered quietly and walked between the rows carrying goods, household items, and cosmetics. And suddenly he found himself face to face with a supermarket worker. He was a young man in his 20s. Burley was stacking goods on the shelves. He tosses cans to the top and picks them up with skill and showy movements. Suddenly, one of the glass bottles fell out of it and broke on the floor. John heard the supermarket owner ask the young man what she broke. The supermarket worker replied, "Nothing. It's an empty package." He laughed mischievously and with his foot pushed the broken package to the bottom of the shelves. Meanwhile, a young woman walked into the supermarket and then into the aisle where John and the supermarket worker were. She was looking for some personal care items for her. And here the supermarket worker left the stocking of goods and accepted it out of a desire to help. But when the woman looked at his face and into his eyes, she quickly turned around and headed for the exit door. John was satisfied with what he saw of this young man and what he noticed on him. From being a playboy who doesn't care about anything. And John expected that any questions he would ask this young man, it will not benefit him and may arouse the suspicion of the supermarket worker towards him. John came out and in his head he was imagining this playboy following Sarah to her house, hidden in the darkness and the calm that reigns in the area. Upon arrival at her house, he took advantage of the absence of the building guard for any reason, and he got up behind her and hit her. Then he committed his crime and rushed down. John walked and was surprised to arrive at the villa inhabited by the guy who was asking Sarah in order to tailor clothes for his deceased wife. And when John arrives at the villa wall, he heard the sound of music coming from inside with the sound of a woman laughing. John knew that the man, as Sarah told him, was living alone after the death of his wife. Curiosity prompted him to enter through the villa door, then head to a small open window from which he looked into the interior of the villa. There was a man in his late 50s. He dances with a girl in her late 20s. The man was dancing with an unusual lightness for a man of his age. It seems that this rich man cares about himself and his desires, and he doesn't care about his age, which is close to 60. Suddenly the girl caught a glimpse of John, whose head was almost sticking out of the window. Inside the villa, the girl screamed and stopped dancing and said, pointing towards John, "There is a thief." And here the man pushed her in front of him and moved fast and light towards his desk and pulled out his gun. And here John set off at full speed, running outside before catching up with him, the owner of the villa, until he got inside the building where he lives. The building guard was not sitting at the entrance door. But when John walked into the building, the guard's voice was heard speaking in Mexican, but his tone gave hints of either pleading or hope and perhaps sadness. John went up to his apartment and went into the balcony looking at the street. Maybe he saw a trace. The owner of the villa is on the street looking for that alleged thief, who entered the villa and then fled from it. But he found no trace of him. And here John was surprised that the satellite dish installer in the TV channel service. He stands on the roof of the building facing his apartment and Sarah's apartment. The man was standing motionless and looking at the building where John lived. But down a little, curiosity took John and he looked down where the TV channel worker is looking. John found a woman standing on the balcony of the third floor talking on the mobile. She was talking in a low voice and the call lasted for more than 10 minutes. And the TV channel operator was watching her still doing nothing. When the woman finished the call, she went into her apartment. And only here the operator of the TV channels moved towards the door of the roof and left. John found himself at a loss again towards this man, who exploits his work or maybe claims that there is a problem that he is fixing. In order to look at the female residents of the building, John made up his mind and again hurried down the building. Perhaps he will have the opportunity to get to know more about the operator of TV channels. Maybe he knows what he owes for Sarah's murder. And maybe if he's lucky, he might make sure he's the killer. When he reached the door of the building, he found the guards standing with the TV channel man. John noticed that he was a man in his early 40s. And he was consoling the guard of the building, who had some tears in his eyes. John paused, wondering what was the reason for the obvious sadness on the face of the building guard. The TV channel worker replied that the wife of the keeper of the estate has been ill for years. She is very ill and needs constant care, and that the keeper of the building sends her his salary every month. However, there is no improvement in her health. The building guard's young daughter told her father that his wife's health condition, it became hopeless. The TV channel worker took out $100 sum and tucked it into the pocket of the building guard. And he told him, "That's all I have now. I'm going to go to the building opposite to fix the TV cable of one of the apartments. And if I get another one, I'll split it with you," and then hurry away. There was no opportunity for John to talk to the man or ask any questions. But John turned to the guard of the building and asked him about his wife's illness. And he understood from him that she was suffering from a serious illness and that he had to leave her and working here for the money. But he misses the feeling of being a man living a normal life with his wife. John took some money out of his pocket and gave it to him. Although the building guard's last sentence, it was enough to increase suspicion towards the keeper of the building. Depriving him of his wife and his normal life prompted him to rape Sarah and kill her. John again went up to his apartment and sat thinking about all the information and impressions that had become in his head towards the suspects. And John wondered why the attention and suspicions of the policemen were not directed towards these suspects. Perhaps the only answer is that Sarah's ghost, of course, did not appear to the cops to tell them, as she herself told him, who she suspected of killing her. Who killed Sarah? Through the information and impressions observed on these 5 suspects in killing Sarah, who is the would-be murderer who committed this heinous crime? Is he the building guard who lives a miserable life alone? He has no hope of healing his wife and misses having a woman in his life. Is he the supermarket worker, that playboy who seems to have a fondness for women? Or is it that rich guy who tried to get close to Sarah by claiming that he wanted her in order to tailor clothes for his wife? Sarah later found out that she was dead and that he had been lying to her. Or is the killer the maintenance worker who said that he would not enter the residential apartments unless he was summoned in an official capacity from apartment owners when asking for help to repair or maintain some special things, such as repairing electrical faults, heating devices, or central air conditioning? Where Sarah assured him that the maintenance worker was arguing and making up reasons in order to get into her apartment for the alleged maintenance. Or is the killer that guy the TV channel operator? He shows interest in observing girls and women by standing on the roof of the building facing the building where John lives. And now do you think you can identify Sarah's killer from the information and notes that John came up with? If you have suspicions that go so far as to indict one of these suspects, please write down the name of the possible killer in order to help John apply for the reopening of the investigation by the police. Please subscribe to the channel in order to follow the solution of this crime and follow up with more interesting stories.